So today we're going to just do a quick overview of everything we've covered in the chapter as far as properties of quadrilaterals, parallelograms, rhombuses, squares, and rectangles. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about the property of a quadrilateral. So remember, a quadrilateral, all it needs to have is 4 sides. We also learned that all of the angles in a quadrilateral are going to sum up to 360. And this is both interior angles of a quadrilateral and the exterior. Because remember, any exterior angle sum for any polygon is always 360. So all of the angles are going to sum to 360, whether it's interior or exterior, for any quadrilateral. Next, we're going to list the properties of the parallelogram. And the properties of the parallelogram, we learned first the definition, and we know that opposite, or both pairs, so both pairs of opposite sides are parallel, and that's the definition. Then we also learned that opposite sides are congruent. These are the theorems that we learned. Then we also learned that opposite angles are congruent. We also learned that the diagonals bisect each other. And then the last thing we learned were that consecutive angles are supplementary. These are all the properties of a parallelogram. And it also has the general properties of the quadrilateral, that it has 4 sides, and all angles, both interior and exterior, will always add up to be 360. And then if you recall, a parallelogram looks like this. And we can add parallel indicators on the sides, showing that the opposite sides are parallel. Also remember, opposite sides are congruent. So this side would be congruent to this, and this one congruent to this. We also know that opposite angles are congruent. So this would be congruent here, and this one here, and here. And then we also learn that the diagonals bisect each other. So if I draw in some diagonals, we know that this piece now here is congruent to this one, and this one to this one. So the diagonals themselves are not congruent, but they are bisected. I know it's kind of a lot of markings here, but no, opposite angles are congruent, opposite sides are congruent, opposite sides are parallel, and diagonals are bisected. So these are all your properties of a parallelogram. Now we're going to get specific and cover the properties of the rhombus. So remember, the rhombus has all of the properties of the parallelogram. In addition, it also has 4 congruent sides. It also has diagonals that are perpendicular. And the diagonals also bisect opposite angles. So let's go ahead and draw a picture of a rhombus. So the rhombus sort of looks like a diamond. And it's got the 4 congruent sides. And then if I draw in the diagonals, my diagonals will be perpendicular. So know it's forming 4 little right triangles here. I also know these diagonals bisect the opposite angles. So I would know that this and this are bisected, and so would these. Next, I'll jump over to the rectangle. And the rectangle has 4 right angles. And its diagonals are congruent. So if I go ahead and draw a picture of a rectangle, so we've got the 4 right angles. We've got the diagonals that are congruent. So let me go ahead and add in some letters here. A, B, C, D. And because my diagonals are congruent, I could state that AC is congruent to BD. And because my diagonals are bisected and congruent, that means all these little pieces are going to be the same. Notice by adding in these markings, what is created here are 4 little isosceles triangles. So those diagonals actually create 4 isosceles triangles. So remember, the square has 4 congruent sides, which it gets from the rhombus. It also has 4 right angles, which it gets from the rectangle. And again, remember, all 3 of these have all the properties of the parallelogram that I wrote in blue. So remember, in addition to the pink I just wrote, know that the square also has the properties here of the diagonals of the rhombus, and then it also has the properties of the diagonal of the rectangle. So all of these rectangle properties also apply to the square, as well as all the properties of the rhombus. And then all 3 have all the properties of the parallelogram and the properties of the general quadrilateral. So this is a nice little review or overview of parallelograms, rectangles, rhombuses, and squares. Yesterday we also talked about trapezoids and kites, but remember, trapezoids and kites are not parallelograms. So if I want to add in a little picture of a square here as well, know it would have the 4 right angles and the 4 congruent sides. We could also add in all that diagonal stuff, but in general, when you see markings like this, you can tell that it's a square. So know that these 3 also have everything that's up above that I wrote in blue, all the properties of the parallelogram. It also has all the angles that add to 360, both interior and exterior, and all of these have 4 sides. Okay, so next slide has the properties of parallelograms. So the first thing was the definition, and then we learned these 4 theorems talking about opposite sides, opposite angles, consecutive angles, and then the diagonals. Then the next one is the 5 ways to prove that a quadrilateral is a parallelogram. And then the next 3 slides are proofs. I want you to attempt these proofs on your own. And then on Monday, I'm going to work them out. And then here is what we just filled in that chart. It's just another visual that you could use to keep track of all the quadrilaterals. Notice this one also includes the isosceles trapezoid, the trapezoid, and the kite. Notice when it branches over here to the parallelogram, notice rectangle and rhombus are underneath it, whereas kite, trapezoid, and isosceles trapezoid are not. They're a separate branch. Have more visuals. Again, the more repetitive time you see this over and over again, the more permanent all of these properties will become. Then the next slides are just in table form. Again, just listing all the information again. So nothing here to